There is a secret in this story that most people won't see coming. And when it finally comes out, everything changes. Emmett Beaumont pretended to lose everything to test the people around him. He told his staff he was bankrupt. He told his board the company was finished. He dressed in old clothes and sat on a bench outside a group home in Shreveport, Louisiana, with an envelope full of $100 bills, waiting to see who would stop. 11 people walked past. 2 looked. One woman, a security guard named Phyllis, told him to move along. But the 12th person, a 17-year-old girl named Nia Carter, who had lived in that group home since she was 6, sat down beside him, opened a brown paper bag, and handed him half of her lunch. A peanut butter sandwich on white bread, cut diagonally. Emmett offered her $500 from the envelope. Nia looked at the money, looked at him and said, "I don't need your money, sir. I need you to eat." Emmett Beaumont was worth $340 million, and a girl who owned nothing had just given him something money could not buy. What he gave her in return would take 12 years to understand. Good to have you here, friends. Please like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Tell us where you're joining from in the comments. Atlanta, London, maybe Ghana or Barbados? We're curious. Now bless her heart, this girl. This story is about a lot of things. Money and pride, and the distance between giving and helping. But most of all, it is about a child who had every reason to take and chose to give instead. And to understand why that choice mattered so much, you need to know 2 things: who Nia Carter was, and who Emmett Beaumont was pretending not to be. Nia Carter was 17 years old on the day she sat on that bench. She was small for her age, 5'2", narrow shoulders, with the compact, efficient build of a girl who had learned to take up as little space as possible because the spaces available to her had always been small. She had dark skin and short hair she kept in twists that she did herself every Sunday night using a YouTube tutorial on the group home's shared computer, and she had a habit of pressing her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger when she was thinking, a tiny, rhythmic motion that made no sound and drew no attention, which was the point, because Nia had spent 11 years in a system that rewarded invisibility and punished need. She had been in the foster system since she was 6. Her mother, Darlene Carter, had died in 2012 of an overdose in a motel room in Bossier City. Nia was in the room. She was found by a maid at 7 a.m., sitting on the floor next to the bed, holding her mother's hand, which was already cold. The maid, a woman named Rosa who had cleaned that motel for 14 years and had seen things that no amount of bleach could erase, wrapped Nia in a towel and carried her to the front desk and called 911 and sat with her until the police came. Rosa was the last person who held Nia for a long time. There was no father on record, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles who came forward. Darlene had been estranged from her family since she was 19, the usual story, the sad and common one, where addiction builds a wall that family can't or won't climb over. Nia entered the Louisiana foster care system on March 14, 2012, and she stayed in it. She was placed in 3 foster homes over the next 5 years. The first family was kind but overwhelmed. They had 4 foster children and 2 biological children, and the house was loud, and Nia was quiet. And quiet children in loud houses become furniture. The second family was adequate, the word the caseworker used in the file, adequate, which is the social services equivalent of a 1-star review. The third family was not adequate. The father drank. The mother looked away. Nia reported it. She was moved. The family was investigated. Nia was placed in the Pine Hills group home in Shreveport, where she had lived since she was 11. Now, the Pine Hills group home was not a bad place. I want to be clear about that because group homes get a reputation that is sometimes deserved and sometimes not. And Pine Hills was run by a woman named Mrs. Delphine Washington, 63, who had been operating the home for 21 years and who believed, with the unyielding conviction of a woman who had raised more children than she could count, that every child who walked through her door deserved 3 things: a clean bed, a hot meal, and one adult who remembered their name without checking a file. Mrs. Delphine The children called her Mrs. Delphine, never Mrs. Washington, because Washington was formal and Mrs. Delphine was family, ran the home on a budget that would make most people weep. The state paid $26.31 per child per day. $26.31 to feed, house, clothe, supervise, and somehow nurture a child for 24 hours. Mrs. Delphine stretched that number the way grandmothers stretch everything, with creativity, with resourcefulness, and with the quiet fury of a woman who knows the number is an insult and refuses to let the children feel the insult. Nia thrived at Pine Hills. Not thrived in the way that movies show, not the dramatic transformation from damaged child to radiant success story. Thrived in the small, daily way that real children thrive, by making her bed without being told, by helping the younger kids with homework, by reading library books on the porch in the afternoons, and by making peanut butter sandwiches for her lunch every morning with the methodical precision of a girl who had learned that the things you can control, the knife angle, the bread alignment, the diagonal cut, are worth controlling because so much else is not. She was smart. Her teachers said so with the specific enthusiasm that teachers reserve for students who exceed the expectations that the system has already set low. Nia maintained a 3.7 GPA at Huntington High School. She was in the 94th percentile on the PSAT. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to study architecture. She had told Mrs. Delphine this once, sitting on the porch, and Mrs. Delphine had said, "Why architecture?" And Nia had said, "Because I want to build things that stay." Mrs. Delphine understood what that sentence meant. A girl who had been moved from place to place for 11 years didn't want to build buildings. She wanted to build permanence. She wanted to put something in the ground that couldn't be relocated. But what Nia didn't know yet was that permanence was about to find her first. Emmett Beaumont was 67 years old. He was the founder and chairman of Beaumont Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate based in Shreveport that produced industrial equipment for the oil and gas sector. He was worth, on paper, $340 million. He lived in a house in South Highlands that had 7 bedrooms and a library and a swimming pool he hadn't used in 4 years because swimming alone felt ridiculous, and Emmett had been alone since his wife, Claire, died of breast cancer in 2019. They had been married for 39 years. They had no children. They had tried, it hadn't happened, and Claire had made peace with it, and Emmett had not, though he pretended to, because pretending was the currency of marriage, and some debts are better left uncollected. Emmett was not a warm man. He was fair, which is different. He paid his employees well. He donated to the United Way. He served on the board of Centenary College. But warmth, the quality that makes a person approachable, the quality that makes a person's presence feel like a room with a fireplace instead of a room with a thermostat, warmth had never been Emmett's language. He spoke in facts. He decided in numbers. He evaluated people the way he evaluated equipment, by output, by reliability, by performance under load. Claire had been the warmth. Claire had translated Emmett to the world, and the world to Emmett. And without her, his interactions had the sterile efficiency of transactions conducted in a language he technically spoke, but didn't feel. After Claire died, Emmett did what wealthy men often do with grief. He turned it into a project. He established the Claire Beaumont Charitable Trust with $10 million and appointed a director and a board and tasked them with identifying deserving individuals for transformative support. The trust gave money. It gave scholarships, grants, emergency funds. It wrote checks. Emmett signed them. The checks went out. Thank you letters came back. Emmett read none of them. The project was Claire's memorial, but it operated at the same distance from human contact as everything else in Emmett's life. Frictionless, efficient, and completely devoid of the thing Claire would have wanted most, which was for Emmett to actually sit with someone and care. In October 2023, Emmett's accountant, a man named Frank who had managed Emmett's finances for 22 years, showed him the trust's annual report. The trust had distributed $1.2 million to 47 recipients. Emmett looked at the number. He said, "Are we making a difference?" Frank said, "The numbers are strong." Emmett said, "I didn't ask about the numbers. I asked if we're making a difference. Frank didn't have an answer for that. Numbers don't measure difference. They measure distribution. And distribution is not the same thing as impact, the same way that rain is not the same thing as a river. One falls everywhere and the other goes somewhere. Emmett decided to find out for himself. Not through reports, not through board meetings, through the method he trusted most: testing. But what happened next changed everything. The test was simple. Emmett would dress in old clothes, a flannel shirt from his closet, work boots from the garage, a canvas jacket that Claire had bought him for yard work that he had never worn because Emmett did not do yard work. He would sit outside a place where people had nothing and offer money to anyone who stopped.
He wanted to see what people did with an offer of help, whether they took it, how they took it, what they said, what they didn't say. He wanted to study generosity the way he studied markets, by observing behavior under controlled conditions. It was not a kind experiment. Pay attention to that. It was not kind because it reduced human beings to data points, and because it positioned Emmett, a man worth $340 million, as a judge of people who had been judged their entire lives. Emmett didn't see this. Wealthy people rarely see the cruelty in their curiosity. They call it research. They call it understanding. They call it getting closer to the community. But sitting on a bench in disguise, watching people who can't afford lunch react to an envelope of money, is not closeness. It is theater. And Emmett was about to learn the difference. He chose Pine Hills because Frank had told him the trust had donated to the group home the previous year. $5,000, earmarked for building maintenance. And Emmett wanted to see where his money went. He parked his car, a Mercedes, but he had driven Claire's old Volvo instead, another costume choice, 2 blocks away. He walked to the bench outside the group home. He sat down. He held the envelope loosely, visible but not displayed. He waited. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. 11 people walked past. Most were adults, neighbors, delivery drivers, a mail carrier. 2 people looked at him with the quick, assessing glance that people give to strangers sitting where strangers don't usually sit. Nobody stopped. Phyllis, the security guard Mrs. Delphine employed on afternoons when the older children walked home from school, told Emmett he couldn't sit there. Emmett said he was waiting for someone. Phyllis said, "Wait somewhere else." Emmett didn't move. Phyllis shook her head and went back to her post. She had learned, in 3 years of guarding a group home, to pick her battles. At 3:45 p.m., the door of the group home opened and Nia Carter walked out. She was carrying a brown paper bag, her afternoon snack, which she ate on the porch every day while reading a library book. She saw the man on the bench. She saw the flannel shirt and the work boots and the canvas jacket. She saw the way he sat, slightly hunched, elbows on knees, the posture of a man who was either tired or pretending to be tired. Nia had spent 11 years in a system that taught her to read people the way other children learn to read books, quickly, accurately, with an eye for what's written between the lines. She sat down beside him, not across from him, not at a distance, beside him, the way you sit with someone who might need company more than space. "You hungry?" she asked. Emmett looked at her. He had not expected this. He had expected people to walk past. He had expected people to take the money. He had not expected a 17-year-old girl to sit down and offer him food. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't look fine." Nia opened the brown bag. Inside was a peanut butter sandwich cut diagonally, an apple, and a small bag of pretzels. She held the sandwich out to him. "Take half. I ate a big lunch." She had not eaten a big lunch. Lunch at Huntington High School was a turkey sandwich, a fruit cup, and milk, and Nia had given her fruit cup to a freshman named DeAndre who had forgotten his lunch money. She was hungry. She was offering half of her food to a stranger while hungry. This is the detail that matters. This is the detail that separates charity from sacrifice. Charity is giving from abundance. Sacrifice is giving from scarcity.
And Naya was giving from scarcity because that was the only kind of giving she had ever known. Emmett took the sandwich. He didn't want it. He had eaten a lunch that cost more than Nia's daily per diem at Pine Hills. But the girl was watching him, and the refusal would have been an insult. So he took the half sandwich, and he bit into it, and it tasted like peanut butter and white bread and something else. Something he hadn't tasted since Claire. Something he couldn't name but recognized the way you recognize a melody from childhood. Care. The sandwich tasted like care. And then he made his move. He pulled the envelope from his jacket. He opened it so Nia could see the bills. Hundreds, stacked, 50 of them, $5,000. He held it out to her. "What's that?" Nia said. "It's money," Emmett said. "For you." Nia looked at the envelope. She looked at the hundreds. She looked at Emmett's face. And something passed behind her eyes. Not greed, not temptation, not even surprise. Recognition. The recognition of a girl who had been offered things by adults her entire life. Placements, solutions, fixes, transfers, and who had learned that offers from strangers come with strings, and strings come with control, and control comes with the loss of the one thing she had managed to keep through 11 years in a system designed to take everything, her autonomy. She said, "I don't need your money, sir. I need you to eat." Emmett stared at her. The envelope stayed in his hand. She didn't take it. She didn't look at it again. She picked up her apple and bit into it and looked out at the street the way a person looks at something they've seen 1,000 times and are still trying to understand. Emmett put the envelope away. He ate the sandwich. They sat in silence for 4 minutes. A long time to sit silently with a stranger. An eternity for a man who filled every silence with decisions and data and the noise of a life that had never learned to be quiet. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nia." "What do you want to be, Nia?" "An architect." "Why?" "Because I want to build things that stay." And that is the thing about certain sentences. They don't travel through the ears. They travel through the chest. They bypass every filter a person has built, and they land directly on the thing that is most unprotected. And for Emmett Beaumont, the most unprotected thing was the absence of a child. He had wanted a child his entire adult life. Claire had wanted a child. They had tried and failed and grieved and moved on. And the moving on had calcified into a permanent posture of self-sufficiency that Emmett wore like armor, and that a 17-year-old girl had just pierced with 6 words about building things that stay. But the real shock was still coming. Emmett went home that evening. He sat in the library, Claire's library, the room she had designed, the room with the deep chairs and the reading lamps and the shelves she had organized by color because she thought books were art, and art should be beautiful before it was functional. He sat in Claire's chair. He held the envelope. $5,000. A girl who owned nothing had turned it down because she thought he was hungrier than she was. And she was wrong about the hunger. He had eaten lunch. But she was right about everything else. He was hungry. He had been hungry since Claire died. He had been feeding himself with checks and boards and reports and the frictionless machinery of philanthropy that never required him to sit on a bench and be looked at by a child who could see through a flannel shirt to the emptiness underneath. He called Frank. He said, "I want you to find out everything about a girl named Nia Carter at the Pine Hills group home." Frank said, "Emmett, what happened?" Emmett said, "She gave me half her sandwich." What Frank found was the file. The system's file. The document that tracked Nia's life the way a spreadsheet tracks inventory. Entries, exits, placements, incidents, assessments. The file said, mother deceased, no father. 3 foster homes, 1 removal for cause. Group home since 2017. Academic performance high. Behavioral record clean. Aging out of system in 7 months. Aging out. The phrase sat in Emmett's mind like a stone in a shoe. Aging out meant turning 18 and leaving. It meant the system's obligation ending. It meant a girl with a 3.7 GPA and a dream of architecture walking out of a group home with whatever she could carry and facing a world that had never built a room for her. Emmett went back to the bench. Not in disguise, in his regular clothes, his regular car, his regular self. He sat down at 3:45. Nia came out. She saw him and stopped. She recognized him, not from the clothes, which were different, but from the face, which was the same. She looked at the Mercedes parked at the curb. She looked at the suit. She looked at the man who had been wearing a flannel shirt yesterday and was wearing $1,200 of tailoring today. She sat down. She pressed her thumbnail into her index finger. She said, "You're not homeless." "No." "Then why were you sitting here yesterday?" Emmett told her the truth. All of it. The test, the envelope, the 11 people who walked past. He told it without defensiveness, without excuses, with the blunt honesty of a man who had realized, in the space between a peanut butter sandwich and a sleepless night, that his test had been the wrong experiment and Nia's sandwich had been the right one. Nia listened. When he finished, she said, "So you were testing us?" "Yes." "That's mean." Emmett closed his eyes. He said, "Yes, it is." Nia was quiet for a moment. She pressed her thumbnail. She said, "That woman who told you to move, Phyllis. She works 12 hours a day guarding this building for $11 an hour. The man who delivered packages this morning has 2 kids, and his car doesn't have air conditioning. The lady who walked past with the grocery bags was Mrs. Delphine's neighbor, and she can't afford the medicine for her diabetes. You sat on a bench with $5,000 and tested people who have been tested their entire lives." She looked at him. "And I'm the one who passed. But what did you learn about the 11 who didn't stop?" Emmett opened his eyes. Nobody had spoken to him like this in years. Not his board, not his staff, not Frank. The last person who had spoken to him with this kind of directness was Claire, and Claire had been dead for 4 years. He said, "I learned that the test was wrong." "Good," Nia said. "Now what are you going to do about it?" And that single moment set off a chain of events nobody could stop. Emmett didn't give Nia money.
She had told him she didn't need his money, and he believed her. Not because she didn't need money, she did, desperately, in the way all children aging out of foster care need money, but because what she needed was not something that came in an envelope. What she needed was what she had said on the first day, things that stay. He offered her something different. He offered her a mentorship, not the corporate kind where a wealthy person takes a young person to lunch twice a year and calls it guidance. A real mentorship. He would meet with her every week. He would teach her what he knew, not about manufacturing or money, but about building, about structure, about the difference between a thing that looks solid and a thing that is solid, about reading blueprints and understanding load calculations and knowing which walls are decorative and which walls hold up the ceiling. Emmett Beaumont had built a company from nothing. He had built it with the same hands that held the peanut butter sandwich. And he would teach this girl how to build things that stay. Nia said, "Why?" Emmett said, "Because you gave me your lunch when you thought I had nothing. And I need to understand the kind of person who does that. Because I've spent 40 years surrounded by people who take, and I've forgotten what giving looks like when it costs something." Nia thought about it for 2 days. She talked to Mrs. Delphine. Mrs. Delphine called Emmett, asked him 14 questions. The questions of a woman who had spent 21 years protecting children from adults who offered things, and was satisfied with 13 of the answers. The 14th. What happens when she turns 18 and ages out? Emmett couldn't answer yet. Mrs. Delphine said, "That's the only question that matters, Mr. Beaumont. Everything else is conversation." Emmett said, "I know. Give me time." The mentorship began in November 2023. Every Saturday morning, Emmett drove to Pine Hills and picked up Nia, and they went to a building. Not a fancy building. A building Emmett had built. An office complex on Uri Drive that his company had constructed in 2008. He walked her through it. He showed her the foundation, the actual foundation, the concrete footings, the rebar grid. He said, "Everything starts here. You can put a beautiful building on top of a weak foundation, and it will look perfect until the first storm. You can put an ugly building on top of a strong foundation, and it will outlast everything around it. The foundation is the truth of the building. Everything above it is opinion."
Nia touched the concrete. She ran her fingers along the rebar. She said, "This is what I want to do." Emmett said, "Then we start here." Over the next 7 months, Emmett taught Nia. He taught her to read blueprints. He taught her basic structural engineering, load paths, compression, tension. He brought her to job sites where his crews were working, and the foreman showed her how concrete was poured, and how steel was welded, and how a building that would stand for 50 years began as a hole in the ground. Nia carried a notebook, spiral, the same kind Mrs. Delphine used for household budgets, and she filled it with sketches and calculations and questions. So many questions. Why are I-beams shaped like that? Why does concrete need rebar? Why do buildings settle? How do you know if a wall is structural? Each question was the same question in different clothing. How do things stay? But what Nia was about to discover would change everything. In March 2024, 5 months before Nia turned 18, Emmett took her to a different building. Not an office complex. A house. A small house on a quiet street in Allendale, a neighborhood in Shreveport where the lots were large and the houses were modest, and the oaks were old enough to shade entire yards. The house was brick, single story, 2 bedrooms, with a porch that didn't lean, and a front step that was level, and a mailbox that stood straight. It was new, or newly renovated. The paint was fresh, the windows were clean, the yard was mowed. Emmett parked the car. He didn't get out immediately. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the house the way a man looks at something he has built and is not sure he has built correctly. With pride cut with anxiety, the specific nervousness of a creator presenting his work. "Whose house is this?" Nia asked. Emmett reached into the glove compartment. He pulled out a folder. Inside the folder was a deed. The deed listed the property address, and in the space marked owner, in typed legal text, was a name. Nia Carter. Nia looked at the deed. She looked at her name. She looked at Emmett. She said, "I told you I don't need your money." Emmett said, "This isn't money, Nia. This is a foundation." Nia's thumbnail pressed hard into her index finger. Her chin trembled. She read the deed again. She said, "You bought me a house." "I built you a house. My crew did the renovation. I supervised it. I wanted to make sure the foundation was right." He paused. "You told me you want to build things that stay. This is the first thing, a place that stays, a place that is yours. Not the systems, not a foster homes, not a group homes. Yours. Your name on the deed, your key in the lock. Nobody can move you out of it. Nobody can transfer you. Nobody can tell you it's temporary. It stays. You stay." Nia opened the car door. She walked to the front step. She stood on it. The step was solid. She felt it with her whole weight, the way Emmett had taught her to test a foundation, and it didn't move. She walked to the front door. It was locked. She turned back to Emmett, who was standing at the car holding a key, a single brass key on a plain ring. He walked to her. He put the key in her hand. He closed her fingers around it. And Nia, who had not cried when she was moved from her first foster home, who had not cried when she was removed from the third, who had not cried when she aged out of Pine Hills 2 weeks earlier with a garbage bag of clothes and a notebook full of blueprints, Nia cried. She held the key, and she pressed it against her chest, and she cried the way a person cries when the thing they have been building in their imagination for 11 years, the thing that stays, the permanent thing, the thing that cannot be transferred or terminated or aged out of, suddenly exists in brass and brick and fresh paint and a porch that doesn't lean. Emmett stood beside her. He didn't hug her. Emmett was not a hugger, and Nia had not been hugged reliably enough to be comfortable with it. He stood. He waited. He let the moment be hers, and when she was ready, she unlocked the door and walked into her house for the first time. And the sound of the key in the lock, the solid mechanical click of a deadbolt opening, was the most permanent sound Nia Carter had ever heard. The house had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faced east. Nia had once told Emmett she liked morning light, and Emmett had remembered, the way men remember things when the remembering matters. A bathroom with a deep tub, and a living room with built-in bookshelves that Emmett had designed himself because Nia loved books, and books needed a place that stayed too. On the kitchen counter, in a simple ceramic vase, was a single sunflower. Mrs. Delphine had placed it there that morning. She had also stocked the refrigerator, made the beds, and hung a small wooden cross above the front door because Mrs. Delphine believed that every home needs a blessing at the threshold, and she was not wrong. There is more to this story. There is always more. Emmett didn't stop at the house. The house was the foundation. But a foundation without a building is a slab. Over the next year, he built the rest. He established a full scholarship for Nia at Louisiana Tech University in Ruston, tuition, books, housing, and a stipend for living expenses. Architecture program. 4 years fully funded. He didn't tell the university who he was. The scholarship was administered through the Claire Beaumont Trust, and Nia's acceptance was based on her portfolio and her grades, not on Emmett's money. She earned the seat. The money opened the door. Those are different things, and the difference mattered to both of them. He hired Mrs. Delphine as a part-time consultant for the Claire Beaumont Trust. $35 an hour, 20 hours a week, advising on the Trust's new foster care initiative. Mrs. Delphine said, "Mr. Beaumont, I've been doing this work for 21 years for $26.31 per child per day. You're going to pay me $35 an hour to tell you what I already know?" Emmett said, "I'm paying you $35 an hour because the state should have been paying you 10 times that for the last 2 decades, and nobody corrected the mistake." Mrs. Delphine accepted. She used the money to repair the Pine Hills roof, which had been leaking since 2019. He funded Phyllis's enrollment in a criminal justice program at Bossier Parish Community College. The security guard who had told him to move along, who worked 12-hour days for $11 an hour, who had been guarding children she couldn't afford to raise herself. Phyllis started classes in January 2025. She told Emmett, "You know I told you to leave, right?" Emmett said, "That's why I'm helping you. You were the only person who tried to protect them from me." And the 11 people who walked past the bench? Emmett tracked them down. Not all 11, but the ones he could find. The neighbor with diabetes got her medication covered through the trust. The delivery driver got his car's air conditioning fixed. Mrs. Delphine's neighbor got a payment plan for her medical bills. Emmett didn't do this publicly. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because Nia had asked him the question that changed everything. What did you learn about the 11 who didn't stop? And the answer was, they didn't stop because they couldn't. They were carrying too much. Their arms were full. Their backs were bent. They weren't selfish. They were surviving. And surviving people don't stop because stopping means putting down the weight. And putting down the weight means admitting you can't carry it. And admitting you can't carry it in a world that punishes that admission is the one thing that survival doesn't allow. Nia started at Louisiana Tech in August 2024. She drove to Ruston in a used Honda Civic that Emmett's crew had inspected and certified. The car was purchased with money from the trust, and Nia insisted on paying it back, $100 a month from her stipend. Emmett argued. Nia said, "Mr. Emmett, I'm not taking something I didn't earn. That's the deal. I earn it or I don't take it." Emmett recognized the sentence. It was the bench. It was the sandwich. It was the same principle. The refusal to receive without reciprocity. The insistence that value is created through exchange and not through charity. He stopped arguing. She calls him every Sunday. The calls last between 15 and 40 minutes. They talk about classes, about blueprints, about the difference between compression and tension, both in buildings and in life. They talk about Claire sometimes. Emmett tells Nia things about Claire that he hasn't told anyone. That Claire used to organize books by color. That Claire made terrible coffee but drank it with such commitment that Emmett never told her. That Claire would have loved Nia immediately and without reservation, because Claire was the kind of person who recognized goodness the way a compass recognizes north. Automatically, structurally, without needing to think about it. Nia told Emmett once, on a Sunday call, "You know the sandwich wasn't about you, right? I give my food to people all the time. DeAndre at school, Marcus at Pine Hills, the man who sleeps near the bus stop on Line Avenue. I give my food away because Mrs. Delphine taught me that hungry people are just people who need lunch, and lunch is something I can give. It wasn't special. You just happened to be there." Emmett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Nia, the fact that it wasn't special is what made it special. You didn't give me your sandwich because I was a test, or a project, or a moment. You gave it to me because you give. That's who you are. It's not a choice you make. It's a structure you were built with. And it is the strongest foundation I have ever seen." Today, Nia Carter is 19. She is in her second year at Louisiana Tech, studying architecture. Her GPA is 3.8. She lives in the dorms during the semester and in the Allendale house during breaks. The house is still hers. The deed is still in her name. The key is on a ring she wears around her neck. Not because she's afraid of losing it, but because she likes the weight of it against her chest. The small, constant reminder that she owns something that cannot be taken. She designed her first building last semester, a community center for a class project. The professor gave her a 97. The building was modest, practical, designed for a neighborhood that looked like the neighborhoods she had grown up in. It had a porch.
The porch didn't lean. The foundation was over-engineered, thicker than necessary, deeper than required, built to hold more weight than the building above it would ever ask for. The professor asked why. Nia said, "Because the foundation should be ready for whatever gets built on top of it. Even if the plan changes, even if the building gets bigger than anyone expected, the foundation should hold." On the wall of Nia's dorm room, next to a print of The Fallingwater House by Frank Lloyd Wright, is a photograph. It shows a bench outside a group home in Shreveport, Louisiana. Nobody is sitting on it. The bench is empty. But taped to the bottom of the frame, in Nia's handwriting, are 5 words that hold the whole story. She gave him the sandwich. A man sat on a bench with $5,000 and tested people who had nothing. A girl sat down beside him, saw a hungry stranger, and gave him half of everything she had. The man offered money. The girl refused. And in that refusal, in the act of pushing an envelope away and pushing a sandwich forward, she taught a man worth $340 million the thing that $340 million could not teach him. That giving is not a transaction, it is not a test, it is not a project or a tax deduction or a name on a building. Giving is a peanut butter sandwich, cut diagonally, offered to a stranger on a bench by a girl who was hungry herself and chose to feed someone else first. That is architecture. That is the strongest foundation there is, and everything built on top of it will stay. I hope this story stays with you for a while. Please like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what you would have done differently. We love reading your thoughts. Until next time.